Hi everyone, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. If you're watching it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the show, make sure to subscribe so that you get notified when a new show is released. And if you'd like to find links to videos or MP3 files, just go to miamighostchronicles.com, and you can also submit any eerie experiences you've had at the Submit Your Story tab. Also, hook up with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find information not only about new shows, but also about monthly free merchandise giveaways. So get comfortable, enjoy this new episode, and just imagine it's a dark and stormy night where not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse. And if a creature is stirring, you hope it's a mouse. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How is everybody doing today? I'm doing fantastic. I know you might not hear this show right at the time because I'm recording right before Thanksgiving. So when you do hear the show, I do want to wish you all a belated Thanksgiving Day, Turkey Day, because now we're going into that season where you can put your diet on the back burner, and then just do a New Year's resolution, which is what we all do. Whatever the case might be, it's a time to be happy, to make good memories. Uh, as you know, I'm here in South Florida, and it's in the 80s. And the reason why I'm laughing, I'm sorry for the rest of you guys. I'm looking at the news and I'm seeing up in Northeast in New York, they're having like below record temperatures, like freezing. And I'm looking out my window and it's like it's hot. It's hot. We've had a couple of cool mornings, but that's it. And I don't mean to, but you know what? It is what it is. And there's times when you guys are really nice and cool. I'm steaming over here, but again, guys, I'm also super excited for the guest that I have here today. I know you guys are going to thoroughly enjoy this interview. And today I have with us Josie Varga. She is the best-selling author of Visits from Heaven. She's the author of several books. She's been called an angel who has taken human form. She's a former magazine editor and communications consultant, and her life changed course when she received a validated dream message from a man who died in the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center. Now, she was forever transformed by her experience, and she embarked on a spiritual journey as she vowed to help others understand that life truly never ends and love never dies. Life, she says, is eternal, and so are we. So let us welcome Josie to the show. How are you doing today, Josie?
I'm good, Maureen. How are you?
Fantastic. Josie, we spoke briefly before we started to record, and one of the things I always ask, obviously in the bio, we make mention that you did have an experience which sounds like it happened when you were already an adult. But prior to that, did you ever have any type of spiritual event or experience? And sometimes, as children, we don't recognize it for what it is. Looking back, did you ever
Yeah,
have anything like that?
well, I'll tell you, first of all, people always say, prior to your experience, did you believe in life
Mm-hmm.
after death? Did you believe in the afterlife? Absolutely. I was raised Roman Catholic, always believed in, God, always believed in the power of prayer. And one of the most amazing things that happened prior to my experience is I was pregnant with my daughter, Erica,
Okay.
at the time, my oldest daughter. And I had what they call an AFP test, where they test the chromosomes, and
Yes.
the doctor called me up and said, I'm sorry, Josie, but the baby has Down syndrome. And of course, I was absolutely devastated.
Right.
I don't know if you noticed, but I was born with a disability known as cerebral palsy. So when I
Yes.
got this message about, my baby, I was, of course, absolutely devastated and blaming myself and everything. But
Mm-hmm.
I got on my knees that night before I went to sleep. We had scheduled an amio, and I had
Okay.
gotten on my knees and I prayed to my grandmother, who is deceased, who is already on the other side. And the interesting thing is, that night, I had a vivid dream. My grandmother lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where I grew up, and she
Okay.
lived in an old two-family house. And in the dream, I walk into the house, into the foyer, and my grandmother lived on the second floor, Marlene. So I
Okay.
look up, and I see my grandmother at the foot of the steps, and she's holding a baby in her arms. Now,
Wow.
I don't know how I knew, but I knew she was holding a baby girl. And she looked at me and she said, telepathically, mind to mind, there were no words. She looked at me and she said, everything's going to be okay. Okay? And the next thing, I woke up out of that dream and I thought, wow, that was so weird. Well, I went for the MEO and I got a phone call from the doctor saying that everything was fine. They couldn't find anything wrong with my daughter.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and that was from him
Wow.
telling me that she had Down syndrome. So, you know, that was the first thing, the first remarkable thing that I can tell you before my experience. So, like, I bring that up because I've always been a believer. And I think that that's important as to why what happened to me did. For instance, after 9/11, um, I have never met my husband's friend and former boss. Never met him. I saw pictures of him, so I knew what he looked like,
Okay.
and I spoke to him on the phone, but I never met him. So on this particular night, I had this vivid, lucid dream. And in this dream, I actually had, it took me a while to understand it, but I actually had an out-of-body experience. So I'm walking down this long hallway, and I come to this door on the right. Walk into the room, Marlene, and I see desks and windows everywhere. And the room had like this, what I would describe like a mist about it. Okay, it's like this fog, and I don't know how else to describe it. But all of a sudden, I look up and I see my husband's friend, and he says to me, Josie. Again, this is telepathically. This is, mind to mind, or in the words.
Right.
He says to me, Josie, thank you for mentioning me in your book. Now, what he meant by that, my first book, Footprints in the Sand, is about my life and how I overcame my disability. And when I was finishing that book, my husband came up to me with an email written by his friend and former boss, which talked about the importance of life and how each wasted minute was a crime. He wrote that email 2 years ago when his father passed away, and my husband kept it. And it was so beautiful that he, for some reason, came up to me and said, this really applies to what you're saying in your book. How about you put it in the book? And I said to him, you know what, okay. So I wrote a little bio about Rich, and I included it in my book. So that's what he meant when he said, Josie, thank you for mentioning me in your book. Now, for reasons that I cannot explain,
Okay.
after he said that to me, I looked up at him and I said, Rich, his name was Rich. I said, Rich, you have to prove to me that this is really you. And
Okay.
with that, he walked up to a desk and he picked up. It was like a flip phone, okay, a cell phone or a flip phone, and he opened it up and he showed it to me. And on the phone was a picture of him, his wife, and his son. And he said, Boston is okay. All right? He said, Boston is okay. And at the time, I had no idea whatsoever what that meant. But
Okay.
I knew intuitively, I knew immediately that this was a message that he wanted me to get to his wife. So the next thing I know, I would describe going through some kind of a window, and it looked like I was out on the street. And I look out and I see him in what I would describe as the bed of a pickup truck. That's what it looked like.
Okay.
And he's standing behind his wife and son, and he's like, okay, Josie, give them the message, and kind of pushes me forward. And when he did that, Maureen, I woke up in a sitting position, panting and out of breath. I felt like something hit me in my chest. and I didn't know what to think.
Okay.
Was I scared? Absolutely. And it's interesting because when I was in the moment, when I was having that conversation with Rich, okay, whatever you want to call it, there was no fear whatsoever.
Right.
But when I came out of it and I woke up on that bed in a sitting position and panting and out of breath, I was saying to myself, "Oh my God, what the heck just happened?" Because I knew it was real, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before.
Right.
So I called my husband, who was already at work, and I told him what happened. And I told him, I said, you have to call his wife. His wife's name is Karen. I said, you have to tell Karen that Boston is okay. And how do you think he responded? He responded like, "You're crazy. This is ridiculous. I'm not calling his wife and telling her Boston is okay," and et cetera, et cetera. And
Yes.
I was so sure that what I experienced was real, and I was very persistent. And I basically, compromised with him. And what we decided to do is I wrote an email describing what happened, and I sent it to my husband. My husband then agreed to forward it to Karen's sister, Rich's sister-in-law, because
Okay.
they both worked in the same field, and he had her email address. So he gets my email, he forwards it to Rich's wife's sister, and he told me that the minute he hit send, he regretted. He regretted it. He was like, "Oh my God, oh my God." He even asked his IT people, "Is there a way to retract the email?" Because he thought, "She's going to think I'm crazy. This is
Right.
ridiculous."
Yes.
But it was already too late. The email was sent, and you know what, Maureen? I was happy because I knew that I did what I was supposed to
Right.
do.
You were like, whatever comes after this.
At least I did what I was supposed to do.
Right.
There was no doubt. It's very interesting, and it's hard to explain this to someone who hasn't experienced something like this. But there was no doubt in my mind whatsoever that what I had experienced was real. And what
Hmm.
I often say is it actually felt more real there than in this reality, okay? And again, it's kind of hard to explain that to someone, but that's exactly how it felt. And that's what many people who have these experiences say, especially people that have had near-death experiences. But so let's go back to my husband. So I tell him, he forwards the email. 2 weeks later, we're on vacation, and he gets a message from Richard's sister-in-law on his BlackBerry, basically saying, to make a very long story short, they have a brother in Boston. Again, never met Rich, never met his
Right.
family, nothing. But they had a brother in Boston, and his wife, her sister, was considering selling her home and moving to Boston. But she
Wow.
felt guilty because she had purchased a house right before he died. And,
Right.
so, oh my God, you know how you read something, Maureen, and don't quite get it? You
Yes.
know,
Like,
it
what are the
didn't,
chances? There's no way you could have known that. It's like, even from
yeah,
your
like,
subconscious mind, there was no way you could have known
yeah,
that.
but it didn't, when he read it, okay, he was reading the message on his BlackBerry, and he read it again, because both of us are like confused. And he read it again, and then we both cupped our mouths like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Then it hit me. Oh my God. Okay? Someone who is deceased, someone who I never met before, came to me in my dream with a message for his wife, and that message was now validated. Okay? So talk about being shaken to the core. I
Absolutely. I imagine that for you, you must have been like, okay, this was not my imagination or a dream or anything.
No, at first, to be perfectly honest with you, I had a few glasses of wine after that because I was just, we were sitting there, both of us, like, oh my God, like, how could this have happened? And what does this mean?
Uh-huh.
In my mind, I'm thinking, why would it come to me? Why didn't you just go straight to your wife and tell her? Why did you come to
Right.
me? And now I understand that, which we can talk about. But, I was just in a state of shock. And at first, I didn't go out there and jump on and shout hey, world, life never ends, love never dies. I didn't do that at first
Yeah, you were still
because
wrapping your head around it yourself in a sense.
yeah, because I was afraid that people were going to think I was crazy, and I happened to be talking to my sister-in-law, and she said something very interesting to me. She said, "Josie, don't you realize that you've been given a gift?" And when she said that to me, it hit me. I'm like, you know what? She's right. I have been given a gift. What a beautiful gift to not be
Yes.
afraid of death anymore, and to know that life truly does continue. So I wanted to, help the bereaved, and I wanted to share my
Mm-hmm.
message. But in the beginning, when I first started researching afterlife communication, it wasn't with the intention of writing a book. It was, just to satisfy my own mind and my own curiosity. I wanted to know that I wasn't alone. And oh
Right.
my God, was I not alone? I mean, there are people around the world who have these experiences. And I can tell you, I've been researching this for about 15 years now,
Okay.
and from the beginning to now, more and more people are willing to share their experiences, and I think
Yes.
a lot of that has to do with there are more and more books on the topic. There are, more and more TV shows, so people
Right.
understand, it's okay. This is not so unusual. You're not crazy.
Well, right, because at some point, like you said before, there was kind of a little bit of a stigma. If you started talking about that, people would look at you like, oh, what are you talking about there? Even though
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that would have had their own personal experiences, but it was like, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. People are going to think you're crazy.
But you know what? It's still like that in some ways. I
Yeah.
mean, my own family does not understand it. Not my husband's very, very supportive. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's what I would call an open-minded skeptic, and
Right.
it's very important to be open-minded but also be skeptical,
Sure.
because there are people out there that take advantage of the bereaved.
Sure.
So
Absolutely. I agree with that.
so it's very important to be skeptical. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that I know what I experienced was real, and I've had so many experiences since then.
Right.
And I wrote Visits from Heaven, which is about afterlife communication,
Mm-hmm.
evidential afterlife communication, and then I followed that with Visits to Heaven, which is about near-death experiences. And
Okay.
then I wrote about divine interventions, okay, and angelic encounters in divine visits. And A Call from Heaven is about deathbed phenomena, which is when people are on their deathbed. I'm sure, I don't know if you've ever had experiences like this, but many times when people are on their deathbed, they mention the presence of deceased loved ones. And
Yes.
I had that happen with my own grandmother. When my grandmother passed away, I went
Right.
over to my grandmother's house. She was having a heart attack, and my grandmother was saying that my grandfather was there. She kept saying to my mother, "Your father's here. Your father's here." And what's interesting about that, I didn't notice until after the funeral and everything. 2 weeks before my grandmother even had her heart attack, I mean, she was completely healthy. She told my
Oh,
cousin,
wow.
she told my cousin that she was seeing my grandfather. So, the spirit always knows when the
Right.
time is near. It doesn't matter if you're sick, you're not sick. On a spiritual level, the soul, so to speak, always knows when your time is near. So, 2 weeks prior to my grandmother even having her heart attack, she told my cousin that my grandfather had come to her. And I wish I would have known that. I would have liked to have asked her, what happened and what did he say. But and it's more common than you even realize. You know.
Well, I one time I had a guest who her regular job, she was a hospice nurse, and she told me, she goes, some of the patients, sometimes she treats them sometimes for months and even years. So she's familiar with them, and she told me, she goes, I know when one of my patients is going to pass away, because exactly like what you described, Josie, they will
Mhm.
start commenting about seeing some deceased loved one or relative. She goes, and sometimes I know who they're talking about. That's why I know that when they see a certain name, they're talking about some family member. And she goes, and sure enough, when they start making those comments, I know that pretty soon they're going to be dying.
Yeah, and it's not only obviously the number one type of deathbed phenomena is visual.
Mm,
Okay, they see their deceased loved ones, they see divine figures and angelic figures or what have you. Sometimes they don't recognize the people that are there. It could be a spirit guide, and they don't
right,
recognize who that person is. Um, Another one is gateway. A lot of times a portal will
right.
actually open up in the room. Another type is atmospheric changes. Sometimes temperatures change in the room. There's a mist in the room. There's like a fog or what have you. Sometimes there's atmospheric changes in the room. A lot of times, and I spoke to one nurse who told me she literally saw a white mist leaving the body when her patient died.
Isn't that's incredible?
Yeah,
And
she actually saw a white mist. And I spoke to another nurse who said it was more silver in color. So,
mm-hmm.
people don't always say white. They do say other colors. And another thing is synchronicity. Okay,
Yes.
there was a story about a man who passed away, and when they went to his house, every single clock in his house was stopped at the time of his death.
Wow.
Every single
That's
clock was
incredible.
stopped. I mean, yeah, and I know other cases where at the time of someone's death, they get a phone call, and they
Yes.
hear static on the
Mm-hmm.
other end. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different things that happen. Synchronicity is another one. Another one is dreams. Okay, so many people have reported that at the moment of death, they had a dream. Like in one case, someone I interviewed, her mother passed away. And at the moment of death, she was sleeping, and her mother came to her in her dream and was saying goodbye. Okay? And she was saying goodbye to her mother in her dreams, and all of a sudden woke up to the sound of the phone.
Wow.
The phone was ringing. She went over to pick up the receiver, and it was the hospital telling her that her mother had just passed away.
Right. And that's something I've also, and I'm sure you probably maybe run across this when you've interviewed people, your research, where, like you said, synchronicity, where some people that are passing away will wait till a loved one, arrives, a certain person. Like, in other words, once that person arrives, they pass. And then I've heard the
Yeah.
opposite, where it's almost like they wait for the family to take a break, almost like they want that moment.
Yeah, one thing I can tell you is that many people can choose the moment of death.
Yes.
Some people can't. In my mother's case, my grandmother was telling her, go home. It's okay. She said, Anna, go home. My mother's name is Anne. She called her Anna. She says,
Mm-hmm.
Anna, go home. Go home. It's okay. I'll be fine. You come back later. My mother left that hospital, okay? Within minutes, my grandmother went into cardiac arrest again
Right.
and,
Right.
and
It's
passed
almost like they
away.
want to spare the loved one, for lack of a better word, the trauma of maybe seeing doctors or nurses rush into the room and try, whatever, or, handle some type of crisis moment.
Yeah, and it's also because I can tell you another thing. People always say to me, well, what book was it that truly told you there was life after death? And honestly, it's all part of the puzzle. Like every single one of my books is just a piece. Like you know, all of these phenomena matter. In other words, but one thing that I can tell you after writing a call from heaven is
Mm-hmm.
that we do not die alone. No one does. We do not
Right.
die alone, and to me that's very comforting. It's
Yes.
very
Yes.
very comforting to know that we do not die alone. And when you take into account like all of these experiences, they count for something. I
Yes.
came up with a method that I call VBU, and what that stands for is volume, okay,
Mm.
believability, and uniformity.
Okay.
So when it comes to volume, Marlene, how many people have reported such phenomena? In my latest book, for instance, I interviewed doctors and nurses and scientists and experts.
Mm-hmm.
So how many people have reported such phenomena? Believability, how credible are they? Again,
Right.
interviewed doctors and experts and scientists. So how credible are they? And uniformity, how similar are the claims? One thing that amazes me, no matter what type of spiritual phenomena that you are, talking about, they are so different, yet they are so much alike. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There's so many similarities in all these experiences, yet at the same time, they are very different. And people say, well, yeah, that's just anecdotal. It's just
Mm-hmm.
personal experiences, and that's not really proof. And that's not true. And Albert Einstein once said, all knowledge of reality starts with experience and ends in it. So in other words, all knowledge starts with personal experience. These experiences, matter very much. And you and I were talking before we went live here. But
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that I said to you is, for those of us that have had such experiences, no proof is necessary.
Right. It's a
Okay?
personal experience that you could tell other people, but even if they don't believe it or whatever, you don't have proof or whatever. That's it. It's sufficient because you know what you experienced.
Yeah, and I don't need proof. And
Right.
for those of us that haven't had such experiences, I don't know. Maybe no proof will ever be enough. Because it's very
Yes.
difficult. It's very difficult. No matter how many stories I point in my book, no matter how much I talk about it, okay? I might be, one of the things that someone said to me, a friend of mine, prior to the publication of Visits from Heaven, he said to me, Josie, you're not going to change minds. He said, you might open minds, Josie, but you're not going to change minds. And it's so true. And now I understand where he was coming from and what he meant by that. But
Right.
honestly, it doesn't really matter. Like I told you, I have people in my family that don't believe, and that's okay.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know,
That's it. And
people have a
everybody
right.
sometimes they arrive to it at a certain point. They're just not ready for it.
Yeah, they're just not ready for it. So, and before I was telling you that I often wondered why Richard's wife would come to me and not
Yes.
to someone else. And what I realized is, think about it. What happened to me is what I call a third party sign. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so it's actually very evidential because
Yes.
I had no, like let's say Richard's wife. Okay, let's say she had a dream, the same dream I had. So she has this
Right.
dream, and her husband's telling her Boston is okay. Now she's already, Marlene, feeling guilty about wanting to move.
Yes. So she
Her
might be
her
thinking
mind,
it's me. It's just I'm making this up.
yeah, exactly. But now you come to me, a third party who has no knowledge of this whatsoever, who has never even met the family, and you give this message to me. Now, how validating is that?
Of course, because there's no way that they could say, well, you knew that somehow. No, I didn't. How could I know about that?
How could I know about that? And, what benefit does that give me to make this story up? Like
Exactly.
I said, I did not want to tell anybody in the beginning. I was quiet as
Sure.
anything.
Well,
you know,
and, and
I
and that's the thing, and I'm, I have to laugh because, I don't know if you remember that show. It's not off the air now. It's Ghost Whisperer, where she was getting these visitations, and she would be
yes,
forced to run and confront these people, and tell them about her ghostly visitations. I'm thinking to myself, come on, most people that have an experience like that really think good and hard, like, how am I going to approach somebody that's possibly grieving and tell
yeah,
them this?
it's very hard. I mean, even for you have all these meet like you see Teresa Caputo, and I don't know
Yes.
how true this is, but like she'll go into the supermarket and she gets
Yeah.
these messages, and I find that a little hard to believe because I mean, let's face it, you're walking around with a bunch of cameras, so
Right. It's like, okay, why is that lady got a cameraman following her?
you know what I'm saying. So it's not like these people don't know that something is going to happen here, but when you go up to somebody who is unsuspecting,
Yes.
who doesn't believe, and you give them a message that you couldn't have otherwise known, how do you explain something like that? There's
Yes.
in my last book, one of the stories that I love in a Call from Heaven is this little boy named Eddie Cuomo. Okay, it's an experience known as a peak Darien experience, and what that means is when those on their deathbeds
Mm-hmm.
mention the presence of a deceased person of whose death, Maureen, they had no knowledge.
Okay.
Okay? Let me explain that. So, Dr. Bruce Grayson over at the University of Virginia wrote a paper about these deathbed phenomena, and I had the distinct pleasure of meeting him. He's a wonderful man that truly cares about his research. But one of the stories that he mentioned was a little boy named Eddie Cuomo.
Okay.
And Eddie is in the hospital, and he's in a coma. Okay?
Okay.
So he ran high fevers. He was in a coma. He comes out of the coma. Then he tells his mother and father that he went to heaven. And he tells his mother that he saw Grandpa Cuomo. He's mentioning all of his deceased loved ones on the
Right.
other side. And then all of a sudden, he says to his father, Dad, I saw Teresa. Teresa was his sister. Teresa, as far as they knew, was healthy and fine away at college in Vermont. But
Oh.
yet, his son comes out of this coma, tells his father he went to heaven, and tells him, oh, and by the way, I saw Teresa. And Teresa said I had to go back. So, of course, his parents get very upset
Sure.
and say, what are you talking about? Your sister's fine. She's away at college. And the little boy says, no, 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 Dad, I saw her. I saw her. She told me that I had to go back. Well,
Oh.
that night, when his parents got home, they found out that their daughter did, in fact, die the night before in a car accident.
Oh my God.
Okay? Now, again, every time I tell that story, like just now, I got goosebumps. I mean,
Let me
because
tell you something.
I,
I think that anybody, but if you're a parent, that's like, okay, like, please wake me up out of this nightmare.
yeah, exactly. But how do you explain that, Maureen?
Of course
How
not.
do
How
you
could that? There's no
explain?
way.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, okay. Other than to say, you know, because people come up to me and say, "Oh, I don't believe, I don't believe." So I always say, "Well, that's all right. You have a right to believe whatever you want to believe, and I'm not going to push my beliefs on you. I'm going to present my research and these experiences, and you can make up your own mind." But how do you explain a boy being in a coma, coming
Right.
out of the coma, telling his parents that his sister, who, as far as they knew,
As
was
far as
alive and
they
well,
knew, right. So it wasn't
okay?
even that you could say, you know how sometimes they say people in comas can hear? It's not even that you could say, well, he overheard a conversation his parents were
Exactly,
having. Yeah,
exactly. Because everybody in the room didn't know what was going on,
exactly. Wow.
okay? So that is one of my
That
favorite.
is that is and let me did that child come out of, after that, out of the coma finally? Did he recover?
Yes,
Does
he's covered. He's perfectly fine, but unfortunately they lost their daughter.
Wow.
But you know what? Honestly, there is a little bit of comfort there
Yes.
because to know that her younger son said he went to heaven and
Right.
saw his sister. At
Mhm.
least she knew that her daughter was still very much alive.
Right.
I mean that is. I think that is comforting.
Of course.
Like
Of course.
people always
Within
ask me, is it easier when I lose a loved one, Marlene? They say, is it easier for me? And to be honest with you, yes, it's
right.
easier. But is it easy? No.
No. No.
It stinks. Okay, it's horrible to lose a loved one because I'm not
Yes.
going to be able to experience them physically like I do now.
Mhm.
However, I can say that it's easier for me in some ways because I do know that life continues.
Right,
You
which
know,
is right, which we talked about that a lot of times the difficulty for families, especially if it's not an elderly person, if it's maybe somebody that's we don't think of as eventually, when we have family members that are old, you kind of get to that point where eventually they're going to pass away. But when it's a younger person or just younger, that I
hmm
think that the family who doesn't understand is worried, like, is this person okay? Like, what happened to that uncertainty, that wanting to take care of them. So, like what you said, having within the most horrible moment that comfort of
yeah,
saying this person's okay.
exactly. I would be absolutely devastated if anything
Mm-hmm.
ever happened to my daughters. I have two daughters, and I'm not. You know what I mean? I would be absolutely devastated. But
Right.
it is a comfort to me to know that life does continue. In my latest book, I'm doing research. I'm kind of including all of my research in one book. Okay,
Okay.
and recently had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Tony Sequoia, and Dr. Sequoia was struck by lightning. And one thing that really amazed me is, so he's struck by lightning, okay?
Okay.
The force of the lightning, pushes his body back. So he feels his body being pushed back about 10 feet from the force of the lightning. But he says all of a sudden, he wasn't going backwards anymore. He felt himself going forward. And he said it was a very weird sensation, okay?
Okay.
So he looks back and he sees he was using a payphone. This was in 1994, so they didn't have cell phones. So he was using a payphone. The lightning struck the building that the payphone was attached to, and the
Oh my
lightning
God.
came through the receiver and hit him in the face and came out of his foot.
Oh my
Okay?
God.
So all of a sudden, he sees the phone dangling there, and he sees his mother-in-law running down the steps, running towards him, and he's wondering, what the heck, what's going on here, right?
Right.
Well, she runs past him. He says to himself, why is she, running past me? What's going on? He turns to look and see where his mother-in-law is going, Marlene, and he
Mm-hmm.
sees his body on the ground. Okay,
Wow.
so he's outside of his body,
Right. Right.
looking down and sees himself on the ground. But one thing that really struck me in talking to him, he said for not 1 second, not for 1 millisecond, was he not conscious. Okay? He said he was able to think, he was able to feel, he was very much conscious the whole time.
So in other words, his self-awareness was always there.
Yes, exactly. And it's just interesting, he called it a continuum of consciousness.
Okay.
Okay? Well, then what is consciousness? Okay?
Right.
Consciousness, that's the big thing these days. Everybody's discussing, well, what is consciousness? But I'll tell you one thing, consciousness is not limited to the body. Because if
Right.
consciousness was limited to the body, then when we die, that's it.
Right.
The
And you
brain
and
dies.
and you remember that there was a time where there was a debate when to call call somebody, call the death. Was it that finally they said, okay, it's when the brain shuts down because they realized
Right,
that even if the
right.
heart was not pumping, then it was the brain. And but I agree with you. Death really is not strictly just a biological thing or
No, it's
event.
not. And you know what's interesting? I just wrote about it today, as a matter of fact. There are cells in the body. We have, what, I think 37 trillion cells in the human body. And when we die, a lot of those cells don't die with it. Okay? When the body dies, a lot of those cells don't die with the body. A lot of those cells are still alive for a period of time. So then, what is death? It's
Ex-
very hard to pinpoint the moment of death, especially, here you have, like I said, Dr. Sequoia, who is a prominent orthopedic surgeon, who's very much trained in science, okay? And the idea that consciousness dies when we die. But yet
right.
he
And
has, yet he's struck by lightning, and he realizes, wait a minute, what's going on here? I'm still very much aware. I'm still very much conscious. And another thing, one of the things that I love about his story, about 3 weeks after he was struck by lightning, he had this insatiable desire to listen to classical piano music out of
Okay.
nowhere. His mother, he had lessons for a year when he was a little boy, but he didn't really care for piano music, gratefully gave it up, didn't want to do it. And now he is, I think in his 40s, has this experience and wants to listen to piano music. Okay, so he goes out and he buys, music. He goes by, sheet music. His babysitter had asked him coincidentally to store her piano at his house, and when she did that, he now had a piano to use. So he started to play the piano. And do you know, he had a dream
Wow.
in which he was given the composition for a song, okay, which he calls the Lightning Sonata. So if you go on YouTube and you put in the Lightning Sonata, it'll come up. So he was given this, the composition, this music. He was given this music in his dreams,
Wow.
and it took him forever to figure out how to actually compose the music.
That's
And
incredible.
now here he is actually performing in concert halls. And he said when he had the dream, he saw himself. He said it was an out-of-body experience. He walked up to himself and he was sitting at a piano playing the song. And after the dream, he couldn't get that music out of his head.
Right.
You
Yes, and
know?
that I think that's one of the phenomena that's so incredible about some of the near-death experiences. Besides the people that relate, like you said, seeing and being witness to things that are sometimes in another room totally. It's
Yeah,
exactly what you're
yeah.
describing, where they can recall or do certain things that before, there's like languages, everything. It's incredible.
It's incredible. So I'm very excited about being able to share his story. Josh Gates, I think it's Expedition Unknown, um, interviewed him recently. So his story is really really phenomenal. And besides that, he is just an all around really nice person. That
Right.
really cares about what he's doing, and he even told me that he's working on a book himself. And I'm glad because the story is so phenomenal. Phenomenal. It needs to be told. I told him that. I said, "Well, I'm glad because it needs to be told."
Well, because it's I want to say, Josie, that there's people that they go along in life and it's not whether they believe or disbelieve, it's just that nothing's ever happened in their life which has led them in the direction of really questioning it. And then something does happen to them
Yeah.
or to somebody, close to them, where all of a sudden they start doing start reading books, start trying to find out what is this really about.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times when people get older, they start to think about, death, and
Mm-hmm.
they're curious about it, and then oftentimes it's because they lose a loved one. That
Right.
that happens. That happens a lot. I have a group on Facebook called Visits from Heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and many of my members are bereaved, so they come onto the group to share their experiences, and I think that's really important because I want people to understand that they are not alone. That these experiences are very much real. I'll tell you one thing very quick. When I was writing Visits from Heaven, one of the stories involves a girl named Angel. And after the book came out and everything, I was in my room folding laundry, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, I heard her voice. Um, I'm very clairaudient, by the way. I'm
Okay.
hearing impaired, but yet I'm clairaudient, which means I hear messages in my mind, which I think is very
Yes.
interesting.
I
Okay,
understand. I
so, so,
understand.
so I'm in my room and I hear call my mom, and intuitively, Marlene, I knew that it was this girl, Angel, and I'm saying to myself, call your mom. How am I going to call you? Why am I going to call your mom? I didn't know why she
Mm-hmm.
wanted me to call her mother, but I was sure that was her. So I went downstairs and I got my contact folder. I pulled out the mother's contact information, not knowing how the heck I was going to explain this to her mother. But
That's a tough one.
I've learned over the years to trust my intuition. So
Yes.
I called her mother, and basically I explained what happened. And you know what was amazing? Her mother said to me, "Oh my God," she said, "Josie, do you know what day it is today?" And I said, "No." She said, "Today is my birthday."
Oh,
And
wow, Josie.
I know. And I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "Well," I said, "Happy birthday from your daughter." Now, had I not listened to that voice,
Yes, you're right.
you know what I'm saying? And there are a lot of people out there that do get messages
Yes.
that, that don't listen to the messages, that think, okay, I'm just going crazy, you know.
Yes.
So it's important. It's important to listen to that inner voice, you know. So
Right.
that was another shocker for me. I never forget that story. And I don't know how, but when I heard the voice in my head, when I heard call my mom, I knew it was her. I just knew it was her.
Right. It's one of those things that, and and I have to say, Josie, I know that, earlier you referred to that possibly when you had that, that connection with this friend
Mhm.
of your husband's, the one that with the 9/11, thing,
Mhm.
that you said, okay, maybe he chose me because in order to validate it, because if it would have gone to maybe a close family member, they would have doubted it. They would have played it off, some my subconscious, my imagination, a million things.
Right.
But then I also want to say that there's got to be something about you. You must have some type of level of sensitivity that also enables that to happen.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I think it's important. Um, let's put it this way. People always ask me, well, for a sign all the time, and I don't get anything. Well, number
Hmm.
one, if you want a sign, ask. Ask. It's as simple as that. Because those on the other side can hear us. They are
Right.
still aware of us, and they can hear us. So if you want a sign, ask. But it's important to understand that conditions have to be right on both sides of the veil.
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of times when people are grieving,
Hmm.
okay, it makes it harder for our
Right.
for their loved ones to come through. Whether they are stuck in anger or whatever, what have you. It makes it harder for their loved ones to come through. So what do? They go through a third party or someone else that they know will get the message to their loved
Yes.
one. How did Rich know that I would get this message to his wife? I don't know, but after that, when I was working on Visits to Heaven, I happened to comment to my husband one time. I said, "You know what? It's funny how, it was because of it that Visits from Heaven came into being." And at the time, I made a comment that I had not heard from him, quote unquote, whether in a dream or whatever. And so that day, I went to New York because I was doing a radio show in New York.
Right.
And I was like in a common area there, and the 17-year-old psychic medium was standing there. And he looked at me and he said, "Josie." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I have a gentleman here for you." So what do, Marlene? I look behind me. I'm like, "Okay, where's this gentleman?"
You're like, all right.
I'm like, "All right, where is he?" And he goes, "No, no, 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 in spirit." So he starts describing the man behind me, and I realized that it was my husband's friend. Okay? And I said,
Oh,
"Oh my God." I said, "Oh my God, it's Rich." And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, it's Rich." He said to tell you that you've been led to do what you do. And I was led to my original publisher, ARE Press, the
uh-huh.
Association for Research and Enlightenment. He says that I was led to that publishing company. And it's so interesting because I had contacted them for reprint permission for one of the stories that is in the book. And for some reason, I felt a connection to this woman, Cassie. Like I just felt a strong connection to her, and she felt a strong connection to me. And
Okay.
that was why I decided to go with ARE. I
There you
I
go.
followed my heart, and my inner voice throughout this whole thing. And one interesting thing, as he said to me, oh, and he says, by the way, the book that you think is coming out when it's coming out isn't. It's actually coming out 2 months later. And I'm thinking, what? And that, and, and that was my book, Visits to Heaven, which is about near-death experiences. And all of a sudden, like I said, we were in the common area waiting to go into the studio, and all of a sudden the producers called us in. So I never got to finish my conversation with the psychic medium. Okay. Interestingly, shortly after that interview, I got a call from my publisher. The book was not coming out in December as planned. It was coming out in February, 2 months later.
And you're like, oh, I knew it. There it is. Like, how did you?
So it's like, you can't, you just can't make this stuff up.
Right. And that's another thing, like you said about synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that you cross paths with somebody, a psychic medium, that's able to pass this information, I really don't think that those things are happenstance.
Well, you know what they say, there is no coincidence, that everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
And I definitely believe that. I mean, I've had so many things happen in my life. There are so many people that I meet that I either feel a strong connection to or I don't, And like I said, I've learned to follow that inner voice.
Right.
I'm more comfortable with the whole thing now. Like I said in the beginning, it was hard for me to go public with my experience, and it was just hard because I didn't know what people were going to think or what people were going to say. And nowadays, Maureen, I could care less, what people say, because it took me a while to understand, hey, that what you experienced was real.
Mm-hmm.
So it really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
Right.
But I really honestly think, times are definitely changing.
Yes.
More and more people are coming forward with their experiences. About 80% of people have had some kind of spiritual experience.
Yes.
Whether that's, an afterlife communication, deathbed visit, whatever, premonition, 80% of people have had some kind of spiritual experience. So the majority of the people out there have had some kind of spiritual experience. And according to I have near-death experiences.
Yes.
So these phenomena are very common, more common than most people even realize.
Right. Well, I think also nowadays there's so many ways to resuscitate people that before would have just died because either the methods or the drugs were not available. So I think that with more people being resuscitated and being brought back, that they're able to, and like you said, whereas before they would have said, I'm not going to talk about this because they might cart me off, the men in white. People are now, like you said, there's books about it. I mean, Dr. Moody, all these books and all these stories from very credible sources where people are more willing to talk about their experiences.
They have, Dr. Sam Pania, he's been all over TV recently, but Dr. Sam Pania did a study where he determined that there was conscious awareness much later than they thought.
Mm-hmm.
There was a man who was able to describe what was going on in the room for up to 3 minutes after, he was supposedly dead. Okay.
Wow.
So what does that mean? When does death actually occur?
Yes.
They say that the brain typically stops, everything stops within 30 seconds. No, that's not true.
Oh,
because
no.
they found that there still is conscious awareness.
Right.
So I don't know. I think it's going to be very hard for people to actually come up with a definition of death, and that is one of the things that I talk about in my latest book. What is death? You
Right, right,
know,
right, right.
I don't.
Like, right. That's not the end of us. Just maybe, just because maybe our bodies are not can't operate anymore for whatever reason, disease,
Yes,
old age, trauma. That
but
doesn't
yeah, but
mean
not only
us doesn't
that.
stop.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So I've been researching the afterlife, like I said, for what, 15 years now. But
Right.
it's not just about understanding that life continues, Marlene. Because what does that say about who we are? Okay, what is
Right.
the body? What is the meaning of life? Who are we really?
Mm-hmm.
And who we really are spiritual beings having a physical experience. It's not the
Exactly.
other way. It's not the other way around. This is something that Ego Casey said a long time ago. Ego Casey was a famous psychic medium. He's the one who started the Association for Research and
Mm-hmm.
Enlightenment. One of the things he said is birth in the physical is death in the spiritual. Death in the physical is birth in the spiritual. Okay?
Right.
I remember on one of I've done a lot of radio interviews, and I was once asked, well, what is death? And I was tongue-tied for a second, like,
Yes.
okay, but you know what? What is death? Well, I can tell you what it isn't. It's not the end.
Right.
And death, if I really had to describe what death is a transition. It's a transition from one form to another. An analogy that I often like to use, say you have a glass of ice, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What happens, Marlene, when that glass of ice is sitting there for a long time? What happens to the ice?
Melts, transforms.
Okay, it melts, okay? Now, if it sits there, still longer, what happens? That,
Evaporation.
that ice turns to water. That water begins to evaporate, okay? The molecules, the H2O, everything goes up into the atmosphere again. The whole process starts again. So that water is not in its original state, but it's still there. It's just in a
Right.
different form. And that's exactly what happens to us. You know, one of the
Yes.
things that we know that has been proven by science is that energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it can only change form. And when you
Exactly.
break down the human body, that's exactly what we are, energy. And
Energy.
when we die, we go back to that initial state.
Right.
You know,
From
our true essence is the soul. Okay, is spirit. It's not the physical. It's not the body. And when we are, that's one of the things that I understood when I had my experience.
And you know what, Josie? A lot of people, I'm gonna say these are the people that think, okay, when you die, that's it. And sometimes they say, well, these people that believe in the afterlife, they're like comforting themselves because they don't want to face the reality that we are finite. That's it. That once our bodies die, that's the end of it. And I think
Mhm.
it's not really. It's not a comfort thing. It's more of a fearless thing. I want to say that when you want to believe that all we are is our physical bodies, it's almost the people that are afraid, and they just want to make sure, like, so it's okay when I die. That's it. It's over. Done. And I've
Well,
heard that a lot of these
no, but
people, as they
I'm
grow
glad
older, then they
I'm
start to
glad you brought
question
that
that.
up. I'm glad you brought that up because in my case, Maureen, that doesn't apply, does it? Because
Right.
I had an experience in which a man I never met.
Exactly.
Okay, they say that people think up these things just to deal with the finality
Yeah.
of
Right. Like a
death.
coping mechanism kind of thing.
Yeah. However, that doesn't apply to me. I was not dealing. Thank God, I was not dealing with the loss of a loved one at the time of my experience, and I never even met this man. Okay, so how do you
Yes.
explain that?
Right. And that but see, the naysayers are always going to point to the uh oh, people like like they they're trying to deny that it's inevitable that we're going to die. And what I was saying
Mhm.
before is that I've heard of a lot of these people that once they start getting on in age, something that you mentioned earlier, they start second guessing this belief that they used to have that all
Yeah,
we are is just our bodies.
and
Because
absolutely, it's true.
they,
But like I said, I'm not sugarcoating the issue. I mean, yeah,
right.
well, we die. So we die in the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Our body definitely dies, but we don't die in the spiritual. And the spiritual is who and what we really are. That's the best way that I can describe it. And really, it doesn't make sense to me when I think about it. Does it make sense that God or a supreme being or whatever it is you believe,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that we were created just to die, and that's it?
Well, of course, and this is the thing that just because we don't know or understand everything doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. If we only get
Exactly.
the periphery of maybe what happens in the afterlife, that's fine because maybe we're not meant to. Because the thing is this, and I tell everybody, we're anchored to this, to our existence in the third dimension to be able to operate. If we maybe knew too much, it would make it impossible to live your life as inside our body. So maybe we're only meant to know just a little bit, and then it's like get back to living.
Okay, well, let's take this into account. Okay, when it comes to the universe, all right, 25% is dark matter,
Mm-hmm.
70% is dark energy, 5%, only 5% is what you and I can see.
Exactly. Like what
The
else is out there?
trees, the rocks, the sky, everything that we can see is only 5%. Why is that? Now, just because we can't see the majority of the universe doesn't mean it's not there.
Exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
Nikola Tesla, who I greatly admire, okay, he said something interesting. He said the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in
Mm-hmm.
all our previous centuries in existence.
Yes.
Okay, so just because we can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean it doesn't
Right.
exist.
Yeah, and,
You
and
know,
like I
and
said, sometimes it's and like sometimes you said it's all in the timing. Maybe us as humans in our evolution, maybe at a certain point we weren't ready to understand it or to take it in.
mhm.
Maybe we're at a stage that we can't. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns there. But I guess what I'm saying is personally, I don't. I think that I consider myself always the student, which means I'm always going to be learning. Okay, but I
Right.
also don't have a problem that there's certain things I may never know. That's okay with me
Yeah, I
because
think right. I think I was just talking about this recently. Okay, I've been studying this for a long time, and the more I learn, Marlene, the
hmm
more I need to learn. Okay, because
right,
I realize that there is so much that we don't understand, and maybe there's so much we're not meant to understand. I don't know, but
right,
our beliefs do not change the truth. Like
sure,
I was raised Roman Catholic. Um, I was raised to believe you go to heaven. You die, you go to heaven. That's it. All right.
hmm
But take reincarnation for instance. What does
hmm
that say about reincarnation? I
exactly,
might not, like the idea of coming back here and learning lessons until I get it right or whatever.
right,
Okay, but my beliefs and what I'm comfortable with doesn't change the truth.
right. And it's maybe something that nobody ever really knows until you die. I mean, it's like one of those things. Like as long as you're alive, you're never gonna get a complete answer, and that's just the way it is supposed to be.
Exactly, but one thing I can say, I definitely know that there's more to our physical existence. I know that, there is an afterlife. There is a life after death. And people say, "Well, how do you know that?" And I say, because of my experience. You know, I I was in the presence of a deceased person who I did
Mm-hmm.
not know, okay, who gave me a message for his wife.
Right.
And that message was later validated. And all things aside, okay, because I can say that 1,000 times to somebody. If they don't want to believe, they're not going to believe.
Absolutely.
But
And
but but I but
I totally agree with you that there's some people that, you know what, they just have what that's their path, what I call it. That's the path they're on.
yeah, that's the path they're on, and that's okay. But I'll tell you, I feel totally blessed. Maybe at the time I didn't feel totally blessed because I didn't know how the heck to deal with what
Sure.
happened. But now looking back, I am totally blessed, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to help others.
Josie,
And
have
that's
you ever had an experience where you've been out and about and
hmm
you've had some spirit, somebody saying, maybe somebody that's been desperate, they've to communicate with a loved one and tell them something like what you described when she's my mother, and it just turned out that it was that person's birthday. Have you ever had that experience, like more immediate, that you're like, which I can imagine puts you in quite a quandary, like how do I tell this person that I might not have any connection with, that I'm getting this message? Have you ever had that?
I've had so many things happen. I mean, I we could do a whole show on all these. But like what I said before is, people always ask me, well, how come I haven't received any signs? And I always
Right.
say, ask. When I had a significant birthday recently, and I was very, very close to my godmother. So
Mm-hmm.
I said to her, I said, godmother, Lucy, her name was. I said, Lucy, give me a sign today. Give me a sign. And my mother had accompanied me to the store, and we're walking across to go into Home Goods over here in New Jersey, and I look down and I see a dime, and my godmother always communicates with dimes because she passed away in 2010. So I always, once our deceased loved ones know that you recognize a sign as being from
Mm-hmm.
them, they will repeat it. Well,
Right.
I pick up the coin, and the corn was the year of my birth, and I thought, oh, that's
Wow.
interesting. So I put it in my pocket. We go into the store, okay? Because there's always that part of me that says, oh, well, I need
Mm-hmm.
more. I need more, I need more of a validation. So we go into the store, we do our shopping, we come out, and in the same spot again is another dime.
Oh
Pick it
God.
up. It's the
What's the
year of my
chances of that?
grandmother's death. So we go in, it's the year of my birth. We come out, it's the year of her death. And I had asked her for a sign. So that, like I said, and I knew it was from her. I knew it was from
Mm-hmm.
her. So when you want a sign from your loved one, ask, but then you have to pay attention because a lot of times people receive signs and they don't even recognize the sign. They don't even realize that they're getting a sign.
Right. Like and one of the things, and most people obviously, when there's the passing of a loved one, there's grief, but sometimes I think that in some cases the communication is late because if there's a lot of guilt or even anger, because those feelings do come up sometimes depending on the relationship between people. I think
Right.
sometimes that has to kind of like fade to the background. In other words, a little bit of time has to go by so that they are able to recognize the
And it
communication or the
depends.
sign.
Yeah, but it depends. Like people ask me all the time, well, when is it too soon to
Right.
get a sign from your loved one? And the answer is, it's not. After going back to my godmother passed away, and 2 days later, I was on the phone with a psychic medium. We had a conference call about something completely different, and he said to me, "Oh, do you want me to try to connect with your godmother?" And my response to him was, "Well, isn't it too soon?
Mm-hmm.
You know, she just passed away." And he said, "Oh, no, 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 it's not too soon. Let me see what I can get." Now, again, this is 2 days later,
Right.
and he said to me, he goes, "Oh, your godmother's pointing to her dress. Why is she pointing to her dress?" And I said to him, "I don't know." And I didn't know. I had no idea why. But I thought at the time she was always the type that liked to be dressed nice.
Right.
So that's what I mentioned to him, but I had no idea. Then he says to me, she's showing me medallions. She's showing me some kind of medallion. He says, why is she showing me medallions? And I said, I don't know. He goes, well, just be aware, and I'm sure you'll find out soon. Well, the next day, I go over to her wake, okay? When I walked in, I almost passed out because my godmother, remember he told me that she was pointing to her dress?
Right.
My godmother was buried in the dress she wore to my wedding.
Oh.
Okay? And I didn't know that. I didn't know she was going to be. There was even a picture of me and her in front of the casket where she was wearing the dress. So I was shocked when I realized, oh my God, she's wearing the dress she wore to my wedding. Okay?
Right.
So I collect myself. I'm sitting down now, and it hits me. I look over at her coffin. My godmother was very, very religious. Okay? She would always say the novenas, the saints. She was very religious.
Uh-huh.
So I look over at her coffin, and clipped to the top of the coffin was all these saint medallions.
Right.
Okay, and he said to me, why is she showing me medallions? I see these gold medallions, and I didn't know what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go to her wake, and I see that she had the saint medallions, clipped to her coffin, the top of the coffin. Again, how did he know that?
Right. That even let's say even if we want to go down the road of this psychic, yes, uses his psychic abilities to read what you knew, but that's not the case because you didn't know it when he told you these
Right,
things. So we could scratch
right.
that out.
Exactly. And another thing that happened that was interesting that day, I clearly heard my godmother her tell me to put pictures of my daughters in her casket.
Oh.
So I went home. You know how they have the break in between. I went home and I got a couple of pictures of my daughters, and I put it in her casket because I clearly heard her tell me to put the pictures of my daughters in the casket.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, like I said, in real life, I'm hearing impaired. But when I get a message from spirit, there is no doubt because it's so clear. I hear it in my mind. So there is no doubt in what I'm hearing.
And that's one of those things that I guess I want to call it's an internal thing that I, like you said, by now to pay attention to it as being authentic and genuine. And
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes people, they, like you said, they kind of want to dismiss it because they think it's their imagination, or this is so weird, and they just dismiss it because it makes them feel uncomfortable. But I'm sure by now you know better.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my God. I couldn't go back to the person I was prior to my experience, even if I tried, because it totally changes who you are and how you look at life. So, and sometimes I do sit here and say, geez, why me? Because it is hard sometimes, Marlene.
Right.
I mean,
Oh.
I have the bereaved coming to me for help all the time, and it breaks my heart. How do you tell a mother who lost her young daughter? Why? She
Mm-hmm.
say, why did God take my daughter, and
Right.
why am I not receiving signs from my daughter, and all that? It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's very, very hard. But
Yes.
at the same time, I'm doing my best to help everyone out there.
Right.
I even have a prayer group on Facebook because I definitely believe in the power of prayer. So
Yes. Yes. I think that and I think people underrate that because unfortunately we and a society have become kind of addicted to instant gratification, or in other words, instant results.
hmm
And sometimes prayer doesn't work that way. Prayer
no, no,
sometimes,
things don't always happen the way we want
right.
them to happen.
Right, or in the
Um,
timeline that you want it. Or and this is another thing. Sometimes you never, for whatever reason, find out that your prayer worked. It worked, but you're just never there to find out. So there's always a question mark. Did it work? Yeah, it did, but maybe you just never found out, depending on what the prayer was for, or it takes place at a certain time,
And
or you
sometimes
find out
things were
about it
meant to
later
happen the
on.
way, that it's happening, and God, or whatever, I don't know. Some people call him a supreme being.
Right.
Whatever your beliefs are, can't interfere. You
Right.
know, like sometimes our loved ones are able to help us. And like my grandmother, for instance, that day when I got on my hands and knees and I prayed to my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I found out that my daughter did not have Down syndrome. Okay, like I said, I do believe in praying to our loved ones on the other side, because
Right.
they can be of more help to us on the other side than they were when they were here. But there
Right.
are but there are cases where they can't interfere. You know.
Right. And one of the things that I personally do is in prayers is that I ask for the most benevolent outcome. And I usually tag that on because sometimes, like you said, what you think you want or what you're praying for, you think, but sometimes it's not really in reality the best for who's involved. And it's maybe because we don't have all the information, or it's just that that is not what's meant to be. But so you're wanting sometimes an outcome that's not really the best.
Exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's important to have faith
Yes.
and give it up to God, leave it up to God.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I'm very inquisitive. I'm very curious, but I'm fine also that there's some things that either I may never know or I'm not meant to know. Whatever, whichever one it falls into, which I think is one of the good things about, you know, as far as wanting to know, there's nothing wrong with it. But, and by this, I don't mean there's any taboo, knowledge per se. I don't believe in that. But some things, for whatever reason, we're just not meant to know to continue to be happy human beings. Just like
Well,
we
yeah,
shelter our
exactly.
children from certain knowledge because it's not appropriate for them. I think that sometimes our happiness, uh, we're better off happy not knowing certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. About the afterlife, I certainly, know a lot more now than I ever did.
Yes.
I understand things more than I ever did,
Mm-hmm.
and and hopefully, I hope others understand as well, through my books and through my speeches and everything else that I'm doing. But like I said to you before, there are certain people that, for whatever reason, are not open to, you know, hearing these
Right,
stories.
exactly. It's like everybody's in their own. And before I forget that, I wanted to mention, I know you said that you were from Elizabeth, New Jersey. My
Mhm.
husband is from Elizabeth, New Jersey. When you said Elizabeth, I said, "Hey,
Really?
yeah, yeah."
Oh, wow.
Right. He
Okay.
left. He moved down here like around I want to say I think it's 1999 and maybe about 4 years ago because he still calls it home. It's like New Jersey's home, and I'm like, no, but you live here now. But to him, it's always home. Because
What part of Elizabeth was he
oh
from?
my
Do you
God,
know?
he's always told me these stories, and I know that because he's in another room now, and I know he went to St. Adalbert's. I think was one of the schools that he went to. It's a Catholic school. Um, and he
Uh,
he grew up running around all over the place and like I said he was there till like 1999. uh I mean he grew up into adulthood there, and like I said we
yeah,
went back there
my
about four or
parents
five
live
years
in
ago.
Florida. My mother, you're in Miami,
Yes, I am.
and my mother is in Deerfield Beach.
Okay.
Uh,
That's just a
so
county up.
my
And
yes,
well, we went back like 4 or 5 years ago because he had wanted to go back, and it had changed, a lot of, and I'm like, okay, you're reliving, you're having a hot tub time moment, things change, people change, because he had a lot of good memories growing up there in Elizabeth. So
yeah,
it's
me too, me too. I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up in a very Italian neighborhood. My parents are from Italy, And it was just we had the Italian feast and everything going on. I
Right. Oh
think,
my God. He tells me about these parties and he was always telling me about all these things that were organized and yeah, and it was like you know, going to the gym and the school and the this and the that and uh yeah, he would tell me like he would leave in the morning and his mom would like not see him the entire day. He'd be gone. You know, the conversation comes up because nowadays, one of the things is that they say kids spend too much time indoors on the computers or, playing on
oh,
games.
totally true. I mean, my daughters, my God, they constantly got their faces in their phones.
Right. And he
Um,
was like,
you
yeah,
know,
no, I grew up different. It was like, man, I went out the door and it was like my mom was lucky if she caught up with me. I would like, at 11 o'clock or I'd run in there and get something to eat and then run back out. Things like,
no, yeah, like I feel like there's no real communication today because everybody's
no.
texting,
Yeah.
everybody's emailing. There's
Right.
less face to face these days, and that's a shame.
Yes,
You
yes,
know.
and that's I think that even as human beings, forget children, besides the, what we talk about as far as health wise, etc. That sometimes even now, I don't know if you've heard the conversation that they want to like, have kids go to school for 12 months straight versus no summer break. And I'm like, no, why? I mean, come
Wow.
on. You know, we kids need that, like
Absolutely.
yeah, when my kids had I would send them to summer camp and they loved it. I'd have to drag them out of there because they were having such a good time. I think it resets your brain for the next grade. But anyway, Josie, I wanted to thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. It has been absolutely fascinating. And I
Oh,
wanted to go ahead, if you could give out your website address for anybody that's listening to the podcast version. I will include a link in the credits of the show, but for people who are listening, what is your website address?
it's www.josie, Josie, Varga, Varga.com.
Okay, Josie Varga. And like I said, I'll make sure to include a link to it on the credits of the show. And again, I want to wish you the best of luck on all your projects.
Thank you
And
very much,
it's a
and thank you
fascinating
so much for
topic.
having me. It was nice chatting with you.
Absolutely. Take care, darling.
All right, bye bye.
Bye bye. Oh boy. Let me tell you something. This is so, to me, it's like, why is somebody calling me? I'm hoping, you know what? There we go. It's like, don't they know I'm busy interviewing? Folks, this is an aside. This thing with the telemarketers is out of control. I'm telling you. This is and even at this point, I have no idea how this number's gotten out because this number is a number that I use strictly for interviewing some of my guests if I'm not interviewing them on Skype. In other words, I have not publicized it. It's not out there. It's used one only for this purpose. And somehow I still it's like hello and I understand now. Well, I do it personally because I have where people now don't answer their phone because it's 9 times out of 10 it's one of these bots or marketing bots or some. My God, this is out of control. It really is. But anyway, guys, I hope you like the show. I know I love speaking to Josie. Her books are fascinating. The subject is fascinating because it's inevitable that all of us at some point or other experience the loss of a loved one. Sometimes it's somebody elderly, like a grandparent or an elderly relative, and as painful as that is, I think it's easier to accept in the sense that that's the way it's supposed to be. We most people, if you are in touch with reality, realize that we're mortal beings, and that as we age, eventually there comes a time that even if you're in healthy, things like wear out. Our organs, our bones, even if you know we wear out, and then others have had a loss of a loved one that sometimes is unexpected or somebody that was younger. When I mean unexpected, either unexpected due to an accident or unexpected because of their age. And some people ask themselves these questions about the afterlife, before they have an experience. And then there's others, like I said, that uh, they kind of think about it, but it's really pushed off because sometimes it's an uncomfortable subject. And then something happens, and then they start asking those questions. And luckily, there's people like Josie Varga that have written books about it. Because, and I've mentioned this before, there's something about when you're going through something difficult, especially like grieving, that when you read about other people experiencing something similar and being able to cope and go, or what, it does give some level of comfort. I mean, it's not like but because unfortunately, I think that what makes any type of emotional pain more difficult is when you feel isolated, when for some reason you think you're being visited with something that's like just specially for you, like almost as the universe picking on me. Or in some cases, some people think God is picking on me. But when you read other stories about people that have experienced similar things, or sometimes even worse, and how what happened with them, especially when the message is very hopeful, and I think that's one of the most important outcomes of reading any book like Josie's putting out, or anybody that writes along those lines, is the hope. Because without hope as human beings, we're basically, when you enter into a state of prolonged apathy, that is when people just give up. And I know that there's times, depending on things that have happened to certain people, where it's inevitable that maybe you get there, but then hopefully you're going to come across a book like the ones that Josie's written, where it's almost like the light at the end of the tunnel, where maybe that pain will never be gone, but that there is comfort in maybe thinking this person is going to be okay. They're going to be okay. Um, that maybe I don't understand exactly the mechanics of it, because obviously I don't think, despite all the reassurances that we get, like I said, I think there's certain things that you're just never going to get until you're there yourself. In other words, until you're dead. And as a live person, the best that we can do is to, especially when we're worried about uh, someone that we loved, okay? And I think this holds especially true. I think that, again, like when we have somebody that's elderly that passes away, and they kind of know, and and everybody knows this person is going to be dying soon, or whatever. Or even if you have somebody that's been ill, okay, that they themselves are the first ones that are trying to tell you, I'm ready to go. In other words, there's a process there. I think the problem comes in when you have somebody that passes away suddenly, sudden heart attack, an accident, something just happens that this person is gone. And I think the ones that are left behind are always, besides the grief of not having that person, they're worried, is my loved one, are they going to be okay? Do they understand what, like it's like this big giant question mark, and you just want that reassurance, like they're okay. This, whatever's going to happen, they're it's okay. And I think that, short of actually dying yourself, uh, reading these type of stories, or the people, the stories that she relates about people that she's interviewed, kind of put a little bit of comfort in the heart of somebody that's grieving, or in somebody that for some reason, like she said, maybe you're getting older. Maybe you never thought about it. Maybe you were scared to think about dying, and man, what if I. talk about dying. Is that going to bring it to me? Yeah, but there's people that are like that. That it's like they even shy away from making funeral arrangements. It's like, yeah, man, I start doing this, and next thing you know, I end up dead. Yes, there's people that think like that. But let's say, like she said, sometimes as people get older and things like that, and I'm not talking, just because you're ill, you're just getting older, and you start thinking about maybe what's been an uncomfortable subject for you, like what happens to me, what's going to happen to me, like even if I'm old, I I want to live. In other words, your body's wearing down, but you're thinking, that me that's inside of me, I don't want this to like just end. And what happens is it over? Is the judgment day scenario, am I going to be raked over the coals for all the bad things I did? There's a lot of fear sometimes that become based on what you were told as a child, based on religious beliefs, um, things maybe that you did, that when you did them, you didn't knew that all of a sudden you didn't care about it, and all of a sudden you start thinking like, man, I did a lot of bad things. Like, what's gonna happen to me now when I'm getting old and I'm dead? Is like, so. I mean, that's the human condition. People evolve, you know. Uh, uh, and then they start asking themselves these questions. And when you read these books, it's kind of like, okay, no, there's more to us than just the skin suit. There's more to our self awareness than what you experience. I think it's a fascinating subject. And I think it's a very important subject because even before we started recording, uh, me and Josie were talking about how sometimes, until very recently, she mentioned that there was kind of a stigma either talking about it, or even people that had near death experiences, or people that had what they call those crisis apparitions, where maybe they saw somebody um, that had just passed away, even without them knowing, and this is how they knew people. It was kind of like, yeah, okay, yeah, but I'm not gonna talk about that because I'm gonna get weird looks. And now it's a little bit more open, and I hate to say it, before that used to be the area that was ruled over strictly by your religious beliefs, which was, depending, of course, what your religious beliefs were, reincarnation, if you're Buddhist, if you were Christian, or in some other religions that believed in an afterlife where heaven and hell and judgment, and in the case of Catholics or some Christians, purgatory. Uh, and this was handled by the religion, and I think that people are realizing this is a spiritual matter that I need to look into for myself as what I really am. You know what they say, a spirit having a physical moment or a physical experience, not the other way around. I think it behooves us all as individual human beings at some point to, depending also what's been happening in your life, if you've been a spiritual religious person all along, you're going to be okay. You kind of understand it, or you have some belief system. And but then there's others, like I said, that for some reason they've been in denial. And I think that's got to be one of the worst things, where, come to think of it, you're one of these people that thinks it all ends, and then it turns out it doesn't. Like, what do you do then? But anyway, guys, I hope you like this. I'm going to take a real quick look. I know I had promised to read to you guys about some of the emails that I've gotten from my true believers. And I've gotten some uh, that I have gotten a lot of them. I just have to go through them and, uh, in other words, make them, because sometimes people, like, especially when people write to me, they kind of write like really crazy, like, okay, but you got to give me a timeline because they skip around. So I'm working on that, but I'm going to have a show that I'm going to read, especially the ones that have just been written to me. Oh, and by the way, I have been telling you I am going to bring out a new book. I'm going to bring out two new books. I kind of rearranged the next one that's going to come out now in December of 2018 is going to be one called Supernatural Safety. And this is a book which talks about almost like a DIY approach to supernatural. By this, I mean, I'm going to throw in some stories, but believe me, doing this as long as I have, I got a lot of stories. And in other words, what can you do to handle something on your own? Because not everything you need a team for. Sometimes it's not even supernatural, paranormal. Okay, and it's kind of a little bit of DIY, some stories thrown in, some suggestions on how to handle things. I also give caveats like no, stop doing that and get somebody knowledgeable and professional in there to help you out. And almost like a way of, because I'm very much into people being empowered about handling, even, in other words, once we rule out non-paranormal things, we're not talking an animal, we're not talking event, we're not talking something in your house that's making a weird noise and you're like ready to move out. Once we cross that off the list, what's left, not everything, and I hate to say it because Hollywood sometimes puts us in that frame of mind, is either malevolent or intelligent or that we need somebody to help us out. Okay, let's not go to worst case scenario from the get-go, because in truth, those worst case scenarios, when we're either talking the intervention of a house blessing or an exorcism, that's, guys, it's very dramatic, but in reality it's very, very rare. Okay, and and I want to say that I don't like it when they disempower us as either individuals or as families or as parents, like that there's nothing you can do, because there's a lot you can do, a lot, especially when you kind of recognize certain things going on. And from this, I'll even put in the book, because I'm not going to give you the whole book up front, things that you can do either when you're going to be, before you even move into a new house, or when you're moving from another house and you have this feeling like, you know what, I don't want anything. Just things that you could do. I think your guys are going to enjoy it. And like I said, it's going to be for sale on my website, miamighostchronicles.com, and also on Amazon. And I'll have links for it once it's ready for purchase. But then I've got another one coming out like in the early part of 2019. But I think you guys are going to enjoy it because, in truth, it's all about you. You do have the power, and we are powerful beings. We are. And by this, I don't mean to be egocentric about it, but there's, and again, I don't have a problem with asking for help if help is necessary, but at the same time, there's no glory in being a victim. We're very powerful, and I think that even when it comes to supernatural paranormal events, there's a lot of things that we can do on our own to either stop it or basically have it fade away. And I'll talk about it more in some other shows. So again, guys, thank you so very much for joining me and spending this time with me. Go to miamighostchronicles.com for more information and links to the shows and podcasts. And again, thank you so very much for sharing this time. And of course, you are all wonderful. Take care.